And so this comes from an article written by Adel Borki, who's a fascinating marketing writer. Go and follow him online. He's actually from the most unlikely place. He lives in Benghazi in Libya, and he's entirely self-taught, a former boxer. But he wrote this piece called "The Greatest Trick Big Tech Ever Pulled on Marketing." And it starts by saying it's commercially naive and strategically negligent to assume that firms like Meta and Alphabet, whose core revenue models depend on monetizing behavioral data and industrial-scale attention segmentation, would refrain from exerting implicit influence over marketing orthodoxy. It's massively in their interests for people to pursue those things which they sell as being uniquely important and exclusively important, whereas something they don't yet sell, like creativity, which is probably a bigger determinant of your advertising success, is relegated to the back room, to secondary importance, simply because they can't claim a monopoly over it. Does that make sense? And I came up with a phrase. The reason there's a picture of a cat is I read the essay and contacted Adele and said, what I'd call this is technoplasmosis. Now, it's a bit weird, but there's a cat parasite called toxoplasmosis. And it wants, in an evolutionary sense, it wants to infect another cat so that its DNA can spread. Now, cats don't bite other cats very often, so it's difficult to get direct cat-to-cat transmission. However, it uses an intermediate host, which, you've guessed it, is probably a mouse or a rat. Now, when a cat bites a mouse and the mouse becomes infected with toxoplasmosis, the parasite infects the brain chemistry of the mouse so that the mouse is no longer afraid of cats. In fact, it finds male cat urine curiously attractive. And it does this because the parasite, which shares none of the DNA of the mouse, wants the mouse to get eaten. And I would argue that to some extent, the metrics that have been laid down by companies that sell data, okay, have infected the brain chemistry of marketers to an extent which is to the advantage of the parasite, not to the advantage of the person who actually owns the brand or the business themselves. And I would argue that consulting firms, which make a lot of money from these sort of digital transformation and tech stack projects, have probably connived in this very process.